Welcome, listeners and subscribers, to Star Trek The Essentials. This podcast will be taking you through what we think are the essential viewing to get an encompassing understanding of what made Star Trek the international pop culture icon it has become today. Today's episode, Balance of Terror.
Under no circumstances are you to cross into the neutral zone without my direct orders.
Acknowledged, sir.
Cancel battle stations. All decks stand by alert.
Cancel battle stations, sir.
Captain, may I respectfully remind the captain what has happened? The Romulans have crossed the neutral zone, attacked our outpost, killed our men.
Mr. Stiles.
Add to that the fact that it was a sneak attack.
Mr. Stiles, are you questioning my orders?
Negative, sir. I'm pointing out that we could have Romulan spies aboard this ship.
I agree, sir. Respectfully recommend all decks maintain security alert.
Very well. All decks security alert.
Security alert, sir.
Picking up communication, sir. It's from this ship.
Pipe it in.
Sounds like code, sir.
I have a fix on it, Captain. I believe I can lock on it. Get a picture of their bridge.
Put it on the screen.
You coming?
Cryptography is working on it, sir.
Give it to Spock.
Didn't quite get that, Mr. Sound.
Nothing, sir.
Repeat it.
I was suggesting that Mr. Spock could probably translate it for you, sir.
I assume you're complimenting Mr. Spock on his ability to decode.
I'm not sure, sir.
Well, here's one thing you can be sure of, mister. Leave any bigotry in your quarters. There's no room for it on the bridge. Do I make myself clear?
You do, sir.
I'm your host, Ren and joined as always my co-host and really the brainchild and creator behind this, Brent Allen. Brent, how are we doing tonight?
Man, I am doing good. I had an incredible gift last night in that one of my children went away to the grandparents and the other one fell asleep at 5 o'clock and she stayed asleep all night long. So I got to do something last night that I've not been able to do in a while, and that is sleep for a very long time. So I'm good. Like, I'm awake, you know, and I've got both the kids down right now. So, man, I'm raring to go. And we got a fantastic episode of Star Trek to talk about tonight. We are broadcasting live on YouTube for this episode. So, man, I'm super excited.
Out.
Yeah, we're trying it out, seeing if it works.
Well, as you know, if you heard from the beginning, everybody, this is the essentials that we think that make up the core of Gene Roddenberry's experience. Or if you're new to Star Trek, or you want to watch all the episodes. How many episodes are there, Brent?
741.
Plus movies.
Plus 13 movies. And a whole bunch of novels, which I've not counted, and a lot of fanfic and
animated series.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot out there.
So if you don't want to go and watch all 741 episodes, this is the podcast for you. Like we said, we're going over the ones that we think sort of encompasses what Star Trek's all about. And as you heard at the beginning, we're going over, what is it? Challenge in Space.
Balance of Terror.
Close. Balance of Terror. First time Romulans pop up. Is that the deal?
That is true. This is the first time that Romulans pop up. This was an episode, Ren. I don't know if you know this, but this, to my
Probably
knowledge,
not.
This is the first time that Star Trek has done this. This was like episode, I want to say 15 of the first season
around
of Star
there.
Trek, somewhere around there, and. They actually based the story of this show off the movie The Enemy Within, it's an old submarine warfare kind of movie. And
this is definitely, when I was watching it,
Yeah.
I was going, this is a submarine movie in space.
Oh, yeah.
It's a submarine battle in space.
Right. You and I might think of The Hunt for Red October, maybe Crimson Tide. But
U-571.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure. But the particular movie they based this off of was The Enemy Within, and which actually was referenced in Crimson Tide. My favorite submarine movie is Crimson Tide anyway. It's a great movie.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
Come on, God. No, it's not.
No?
No, it's, what is it, Down Periscope? Kelsey Grammer?
That's true. You bring up a very good point because Down Periscope is hilarious.
That is your favorite submarine movie.
It is.
Unfortunately.
It is great. I will watch Down Periscope 5 times over watching Crimson Tide. It's a good movie, but I do like Crimson Tide a lot. Anyway, The Enemy Within, but Star Trek will have a history, particularly as we get into Next Generation and Voyager and Deep Space Nine, and I don't know that they do it a whole lot in Enterprise, but they actually pull their story, they lift it out of some sort of a movie or other episode. They kind of do their take on what that movie is, and I believe this is the first time that we've seen this in the history of Star Trek. So, yeah, but the Romulans, the big thing, what really makes this an essential episode, outside of it's a really good episode, despite how often it took you to actually get this one under your belt, Ren.
I fell asleep on it like 4 times, listeners.
Every time I text Ren, hey, are we gonna talk about Balance of Terror? I fell asleep.
I fell asleep. I actually, funny, like one point I was trying to squeeze it in. We actually have company over right there in for the 4th, and I was like, okay, I'll make dinner, I'll eat dinner, and then I'll watch it, and we'll go at what we were saying. We're going to go at 10. Like we'll go at 10 Eastern Standard Time, and I got everything done. I had enough time to squeeze the episode in, make some notes, and I woke up at 9:50 as like the credits were rolling for the 3rd time. I fell asleep during that episode. And what did she text me? It's like, the episode's really not that boring, and it wasn't. It's a really good episode. I was just beat the other couple times I tried to watch it. But finally, oddly enough, today when I watched it, I fell asleep again, but only for like 5 minutes. So I just rewound it, and
you were able to make it.
I made it through.
That's fair, but it's a good episode though. This one definitely ranks, I think, in my personal top 3 favorite episodes of TOS, and to me, I think is probably in top 10 of all Star Trek. Across the board. Yeah, I love this episode.
You must, because you're not a TOS fan.
I'm not it's just not my Trek. It's not the one that I grew up with. The effects and everything are so very dated that it actually becomes distracting to me to watch. But when you can get past that and actually just get to the core of the story and the style of acting that they have, that can be weird. When you can get to the core of the story and what they're trying to tell, this is a great episode. And yeah, so that's a part of what makes this an essential episode to watch. There's 70 some odd of the original series. This is one of, I think we're going to do about somewhere between 13 and 14 episodes from the original series. This is one of them you absolutely should watch. But also it's where we meet the Romulans for the first time. And, it introduces us to sort of a little bit of the history of the Romulans and the Federation and what's going on there. So, and I'm sure we'll get into that as we hit the recap and stuff.
And speaking of recap, here we go.
Segue.
Hey.
Set me up there, buddy.
If anybody's out there going, okay, I'm following what you're saying, but I can't remember this episode, this one's going to be pretty short and sweet as far as the recap. We like to do this at around the beginning of each episode. Well, basically, it's like we've talked about, the submarine battle in space. There is the neutral zone, which we have, if you have learned about Star Trek or watched Star Trek, you've heard about the neutral zone. It's a zone in between Romulan space and Federation space that a Federation ship or a Romulan ship can't enter. And there's a neutral zone between Klingon space and Federation space as well, right? That's what the Kobayashi Maru is all about, isn't it?
They might call it a neutral zone over there. We're going to get to the Klingons here in just a little bit.
Yeah, really short.
Yeah.
So I'm jumping a little ahead. Anyway, we know what the neutral zone is, and the Federation has sort of these star bases, outposts that line along the neutral zone on the Federation side, and somebody's blowing them up and attacking them, and so. Here comes the USS Enterprise. They're called in to check out what's going on, and there's a little bit of cat and mouse of what it is. And then this is where we first see the Romulans and their famous cloaking device, and it basically becomes a cat and mouse game. Can the Enterprise get to the Romulans before they get back on their side of the space? Are they going to actually go into the neutral zone if they have to be able to go after the Romulans, who have destroyed a couple of these outposts that line the neutral zone? And that's pretty much the show. A lot of it's cat and mouse game. We talked about the submarine thing where the Romulans twice put debris in the torpedo tubes and jetted out in space. That's a classic submarine movie ploy. Even jettisoned a body at one point to try to fool the Enterprise about their ship being destroyed, the Romulan ship being destroyed. And another reason
the fooling lasted like 10 seconds.
Yeah,
Hey, there's something out there. Maybe we got them. Oh wait, never mind. There's not nearly enough.
Yeah, Spock figured it out. Not enough debris. But what really makes it a sub movie is that since the Romulans have the cloaking device, the Enterprise is basically trying to fight these guys blind. So it's very much cloak and dagger, trying to outmaneuver, outthink the other person. We talked about in the first episode, the Corbinite maneuver, how it was, chess or poker. This is definitely like this is old school submarine warfare with and they make both the commanders, which I found interesting, really savvy, like very smart.
And by both you mean Kirk and the Romulan commander.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So
they were equals for sure.
What's that?
They were equals, on the same.
Oh yeah,
same
they
level.
were equals for sure. Like it was, like I said, one would have the upper hand. The next move, the other guy would get the upper hand, and then the Romulans get the upper hand, and then Kirk and the Federation would get it back, and then it all encompasses at the end where the Enterprise, after they've pretty much disabled each other, the Enterprise pulls off one last maneuver and and opens a comm link to the Romulans and says, beam over your injured and your survivors and we're here to help. Basically, battle's over. Now let's take care of your wounded. And the Romulan captain's like, that's not what we do. There's a sense of duty, and basically hits the self-destruct button and the ship blows up. And that's kind of it. But like we said, as far as a submarine battle in space and an actual thinking man's battle, not just there it is, turn on the phasers, blow it up, or some insurmountable odds that you find with the Borg, where it's just like a never-ending battle. This is like two evenly, armed opponents. Equally seasoned, equally experienced, going at it, and it was fun to watch. Like you said, it was a really good episode.
Yeah, I don't know that it's fair to say that they were equally armed. The Romulans, aside from having the cloak, also had a really stinking super powerful weapon that Kirk had to figure out how to overcome. They just didn't have the Enterprise just did not have that kind of technology to be able to defend against that particular weapon. I mean, it was taking out outposts. That's kind of how I think you mentioned it started. The outposts, it was taking them out like pretty fast. Yeah,
a couple of shots and they were dead.
Boom, gone. So
yeah, you're right on that.
But there's there's an old term that I have. I'm a tech guy. It's not the gear that matters. It's the person who's behind the gear. It's can you use what you have? Can you use what you have at your disposal? Gear is fun. Gear's a whole lot of fun. It lets you do a lot of stuff you couldn't do otherwise. But at the end of the day, to get the job done, it's really about the skill of the person who's behind the gear. So, seeing Kirk be able to figure out how to outsmart and outmaneuver. And I got to be honest, Ren. Truth be told, I'm I'm watching a lot of the strategy and the tactics, particularly that the Romulan guy is doing. And I probably watched this episode, I don't know, 3 or 4 times in prep for this show, and then I've seen it a handful of times before now. I never really tracked with some of the strategic stuff that he was doing. Like,
no, there's actually a lot of plot holes in this show.
Yeah.
There are. I mean, if you try to take it, you just got to sort of take the show at face value, because some of the logic and not being able to see it, but you can see it on the sensors. Well, if you can't visualize it, then how can you hit it with phasers? But Spock can see it in the sensors and know exactly, which trajectory it's going on. It's like, well, that doesn't jive. There's a lot of things if you kind of pause the show.
Like there's we're going to go into this. We're going to go into the comet, and we're going to lose them. Their sensors aren't going to be able to follow us. But we go in the comet, and we're going to disrupt the trail of the comet, so they're going to see where we are anyway. Like, I just, for 2 commanders who were supposed to be evenly matched, the Romulans just made a lot of moves that I didn't quite understand. But there was a bit of the suspension of disbelief, I guess you would say, that I just went with it that they were evenly matched. That was, I think, the point that they were trying to make between the two, of they had to get in each other's heads and try to figure out what the other guy was trying to do, and so they could decide what each individual one was going to try to do themselves.
Well, let's start with the Romulans. Now,
okay.
The Romulan commander looked extremely familiar to me.
He should have.
Okay, so I'm right. So this is the same actor that ends up playing Spock's dad.
Yeah.
Later on in episodes and in the movie.
Yeah.
Is it Sarek?
Sarek, yeah, he plays Sarek, and he goes on to play Sarek.
When he first popped on the screen, I'm like, why is Spock's dad dressed as a Romulan? Which, by the way, early Romulans look exactly like Vulcans. Pointy ears, pointy eyebrows, bad bowl cuts. I mean, and they sort of reference that in the show, how the Romulans and the Vulcans, and correct if I get this wrong, this is kind of how I understood it, they just sort of split at one time. And there were 2 factions, and one, the Vulcans, ended up, intelligence, science, logic is sort of what that faction followed, and the other one was a very more warlike faction.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing, because if you go back to our last episode, Ren, the Menagerie, parts 1 and 2, one of the conversations we had was the sort of about the self-lie that Vulcans tell themselves about this need. It's not that they don't have emotions, they have them, they've just learned to suppress them. That's the line that we're given. And so they stick with logic, and that's their logic thing. But they've been doing this for hundreds and hundreds, if not millennia, centuries and centuries, if not millennia. They've been doing this. Who knows where they would have gone? Who knows where they would have evolved had they actually learned to deal with their emotions? And it's possible. It's a thing to look at with the Romulans. That and what they tell us is that Romulans and Vulcans had a shared ancestor. They are not the same species, but they're very, very similar. And that actually even further split later between the Romulans and the Remans. And we'll get into that as those episodes come along. But it's an interesting thought that the Romulans could be the expression of what Vulcans would be had they not learned how to suppress their logic.
Right. Feelings.
Sorry, their feelings, their emotions. But yeah, Mark Leonard is the guy who plays the Romulan commander, and he does go on to play Spock's dad, which, this movie has this great moment. Like, looking back at it, with what we know, what we know now, going into the movie or into the episode, they tell us, or Spock, in a really nice moment of exposition, says, he's like, no one has ever seen a Romulan. We don't know what they look like. They don't know what we look like. ... And there's a guy on the bridge who his family,
which is kind of a theme. Whoever sits next to Sulu in the navigator's chair,
right?
Kind of, it's like goes rogue,
right? He should wear a red shirt permanently.
Yeah,
That
it's
guy,
whoever's
right?
sitting in that, if you're sitting in the captain's chair, whoever's sitting in that right navigator's chair is just like, they just like go rogue, question orders, lose it on the bridge. Like, it seems to be, okay, you sit here and, you're going to be the problem on the bridge this week.
Right. Right. And, so he gets out and is like, I don't like Romulans. And then all of a sudden, like, this picture flashes up. We get a chance to see what Romulans look like for the very first time. And he turns around and Spock is like looking at him, and you can almost look at him and he goes, Dad?
Yeah. Huh.
Like, just the look Spock's giving. Of course, everybody turns and looks at Spock. And I mean, the navigator is he's stinky eyeing Spock. Sulu, though, man, if you ever go back and watch this episode, Ren, take a look at what Sulu does when in this moment he is throwing daggers at Spock.
Shade.
Oh my gosh, which is a whole interesting thing in and of itself when you consider that George Takei was a part of the Japanese internment camps during World War II. Like, he knows what it is to be judged just based on the color of your skin and based on what you look like. And yet he's acting this, having like, throwing these daggers, because now we're getting into, again, another part of what makes this an essential episode of Star Trek is as you start getting into the ideas of racism and bigotry and beginning to deal with that and what that looks like when it's, when it's on the bridge, so to speak, when you bring it home and all of a sudden it's in your face, So it's an amazing moment. It really is to see the Romulan for the first time and catch everybody's reaction.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned bigotry. And I think that's probably the main theme throughout this show. Of course, it's Star Trek, so everything ends up okay in the end. But also, we talked about it in our first pod about how there's probably going to be this theme of Spock, Kirk, and McCoy being the id, the ego, and the superego. And, that showed up again, this episode. Even though McCoy was in there very briefly, he was sort of the, I don't know, if you want to call Kirk the middle and call Spock left or right wing and call McCoy, whatever side you want to put them on, McCoy was the one like, well, if you make a wrong move, you're going to start a galactic war. I hope you do the right thing. There's one little speech where, there's millions of galaxies out there and with, billions of planets, but there's only one of you. Like, make sure you just don't destroy you. Basically, like, don't get us killed. Like I said, McCoy's there very briefly, but I think he's there for this show he's basically saying all the questions that someone who's like not in the military or somebody watching the show that thinks it's not the best idea to fight or the best idea to follow him in the neutral zone, giving that side of the argument. He's in there a lot. So
yeah, and in that moment that you're talking about, Ren, if you actually even look at the blocking, it literally, Kirk is there and McCoy is over one shoulder and Spock is over the other shoulder.
Right.
Like, almost literally it looks like it's the angel and the devil sitting on each side. And from a storytelling standpoint, especially in a visual mode such as television, we're not going to have the internal dialogue of what's going on in Spock's brain. So to allow the conversation to exist outside of his head in the form of these two people, and where I've recently noticed the same thing being used again, though I'm not 100% that it was so intentional as it was with Star Trek, but is in Harry Potter. And I don't know how much you read Harry Potter, Ren, but
I've read them all.
There you go. I have just come through with another podcast that I get the pleasure of being part of the production of, and we're just going through the Harry Potter series and just finished, and especially in the 7th book, but really throughout, I started kind of thinking of it through the lens of the Star Trek thing as we were preparing for this podcast, and realizing how much Ron and Hermione very much are this Spock and McCoy for Harry. It allows that conversation to happen. And if you just kind of write Ron or McCoy to be the emotional side of everything, and you write Hermione or Spock to be the logical, brainy side of everything, it allows for that conversation to take place in a real interesting storytelling type of way. So, seeing that, actually, I think it helps improve my appreciation for how they write and act and direct the show.
Yeah, you watch the show and you see some of the acting and some of the lighting. I'm really starting to notice that they like to put just a light bar. Exactly what I was going to do. Just a light bar right on Kirk's eyes. Everything else is shadowed out except his eyes are just a beam of light across his eyes.
Yeah,
they do that a lot, and how bad that is. But then.
It's
and then
so obvious. That's what makes it bad, is because it's so obvious. There's no subtlety to it. None.
But then you talk about how, when they're in the briefing room and they're trying to discuss what they're going to do, and like you said about the blocking, where, and it's something that they thought out and sort of are going to continue this yarn throughout the series about how, McCoy and Spock on each side of Kirk, sort of giving his basically they're saying out loud what any of us would think, as we go back and forth through a decision, like a life and death decision or a right and wrong decision. Being the captain, being out there in space, instead of just, like you said, like an inner monologue rolling, we got these two characters that sort of give, almost the yin and yang of the situation, and you got to sort it out and get through it. So I'm sure it's not revolutionary, but how subtle it is, I think it was something that I like and respect about, the writing and the storytelling even back then.
Yeah, I agree with you. I 100% agree with you. I think it looking at it through this way, it just deepens my appreciation for what they did back then.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right. So, speaking of the yin and yang and the good and the bad and going through this, the Romulan commander, like I said, I have company over, and I didn't. What's his name in the show? Commander.
It might just be Commander.
All right, Commander.
I really don't know.
Commander, what's his name?
Yeah.
He has his own sort of first officer. He has and McCoy sort of rolled up all into one.
Yeah, it's just Romulan Commander. Sorry.
Romulan Commander.
That's
sure.
his no
title.
Problem. In the script,
he has
Romulan Commander.
Yeah, but he has his first officer that he bounces his ideas off of. Sort of
Centurion. That guy
one
was
more time?
The Centurion.
The Centurion, yes, that was his official title. And you could tell that these guys have gone through a lot of missions together, and they trust each other. And this, when the Centurion actually has a piece of the ship fall him, and he dies during the space battle. And this is something where I also think this episode tries to show us that, they try to build this camaraderie between the Romulan commander and the Centurion as sort of like I think it's more of a Kirk McCoy relationship those two have, and that that there's consequences, even though the Romulans are the bad guys. They came across the neutral zone and blew up a bunch of Earthlings and blew up some Federation outposts. But they also try to show you in this episode that, there's losses on both sides. Like there's real people on the other side of your gun, right. and they have their own stories, and they have their own families, and they have their own histories. And I think that was something that they're also trying to show in this episode that, but in the end, this is their duty, they talk about that a few times, and, this is the life they've chosen. And I just thought that was something that they tried to bring to the forefront of this episode of I guess the kind of a cliche way to put it is show you that, war is hell.
Yeah. Well, you're actually getting into what I think is probably one of the more, I don't know what you call it, kind of like a bonk on the head sort of thing that Star Trek is trying to do. Because first of all, remember that this was a story that was told to us back in 1966, right? So we would be very much, I guess, in the middle of the Cold War at that point. Forgive me, I don't know my history that well, but Vietnam is either getting going or starting to ramp up at that point, isn't it?
I believe so. I think Vietnam ended in 1971.
Yeah, so Vietnam's kind of
starting to
boil over, right? You got the Cold War going on, you got everything with Russia and all that kind of stuff, and they dropped this episode. And somebody else on another podcast pointed out about this, and I thought it was absolutely true, and definitely it's in front of your face. The idea that, you know, sometimes the guy who is your enemy is only your enemy because they were born on the other side of the line.
Oh yeah,
like there's otherwise they'd be your friend.
Yeah,
you know, and like it's when you think about how, you know, particularly, I mean, and you translate that to today. And I don't care when you're listening to this, whether you're listening to this the moment that we hit release on this podcast, or whether you come back to this podcast in 5 years, 10 years, whatever's going on in the world today, I guarantee you there's going to be something about this. It's part of, I think, why Star Trek has transcended over the last 50 plus years. But the idea that they're just people, you know, they're people who have wives and children and parents and families, and they love their kids and they play with their kids. You know, earlier today
and both sides think they're doing the just and right thing,
right? And they're sticking up for their country and they're whatever, and you know, whatever that looks like, they, you know, but the only thing that makes them the bad guys is that they were born on the other side of the line. Like, that, I feel like that should give us a moment of pause when we start looking at who is your enemy. You know,
yeah, because you know, they allude to that a lot, especially, you know, during the chess game they're playing in space. You know, a couple times Kirk talks about how, I underestimated him. I won't do that again. He calls him, you know, clever or something like that, and I know the Romulan commander calls Kirk shrewd at one point, and then when he finally gets him in the end, he's like he's a sorcerer, he's in my mind, because, you know, they're out thinking. But right before, you know, I mentioned how instead of surrendering, the Romulan commander blows his ship up. He basically roughly says that he's like in another lifetime or in a parallel universe, like, I think we would have been friends.
Yeah.
You know, we both have a sense of duty, and you know, and he recognized, like, we're both just doing our jobs. You know, and in another lifetime, I think, you know, we would have been buddies, but as of now, we're not, and I'm gonna push the self-destruct button.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just there. Any thinking human being should be able to look at that and be able to apply that to whatever situation you find yourself in. Like,
yeah, I was thinking about something today. It's like every generation, you know, and definitely, you know, our generation, I know we're a few years apart, but I kind of put us in the same generation, and then today's generation, and the generation before us. At one point or another, you know, you feel like somebody we'll talk about movies and TV shows, but some director or some TV show comes along and tackles a social issue head on. You know, and that generation thinks, you know, finally someone shed the light on this issue, right. Or look, now we're finally talking about this issue. And then if you start to look at older movies and older TV shows, it's the same issue that, you know, that was a big problem in the 60s, was a big problem in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and still is today. So, you know, when you think that this great piece of cinema comes out because it lifts the veil off the social issue, it's like, you know, if you really think about it, I think there's about 5 or 10 things that humanity has been struggling with consistently for as far back as you can trace it.
Sure.
So I just like you said, it was a really good episode. There's, like we said, there's bigotry in it. Sometimes it just depends on where you're born. I like to say this a lot, like polenta and grits are the same thing. It just depends on which part of the world you're standing in. You're standing in Georgia, they're grits. You're standing in Spain, they're polenta. It's ground cornmeal. It's the same thing. So it's like you said, there's a lot to think about in this one. And besides the special effects, which are terrible, on the Romulan side, for sure.
Or things like the phaser, right? Like, I'm sorry, just to put this, what they are calling a phaser, we later come to know is basically a photon torpedo.
Right.
And why did they have to relay the command down to the phaser room?
Yeah.
Can you not put the button on the bridge?
Yeah. This is something. Yeah. So, listeners, when every Star Trek from almost here on out, they go, okay, ready phaser banks, and the navigator plugs them in and go, okay, phaser banks ready, fire, and then the navigator pushes a button and hits fire. But in this one, for some reason, there's extended scenes where they're calling down to the phaser room, quote unquote phaser room,
right? And
they're sort of like loading it up and charging it up.
Yeah,
and they're actually firing it from that room.
Sure.
Like Kirk just says fire, and the navigator relays the order to the phaser room, and then the phaser room fires,
right.
Which something gets cut out. It might just be in there for the whole wedding scene, which I didn't talk about, which is another thing that they bring up is like the destroying of young love and young life.
Sure.
What war does.
Sure. Well, it's. I mean, okay, let's just touch on that because that one's fairly brief. War has consequences. Has real consequences to real people, and it really matters. And that's the and by the way, you're watching this episode, you see this little secret message that Kirk the first thing he does, he goes over and he has this little whispered conversation with Spock up on the bridge through an intercom. It's like, What's going on? Okay, keep me posted. And then he turns around and smiles and, we're supposed to do a wedding. And at that moment, at the end of the episode, one of those two people, if not both, aren't going to be alive.
Yeah.
You just know that they're not going to be alive.
You couldn't tell because neither one are wearing red at the time.
They should have been, but okay. I think I should point this out. The whole red shirt thing. Did you know is a myth?
No, it's not a myth.
Yes, like mathematically speaking, gold shirts actually die more. Random gold shirts die more than random red shirts do in Star Trek: The Original Series.
On away teams?
Across the board.
Or just
across the board.
I'm talking away teams.
But even on away team, we should look it up. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but somebody actually went back and counted through all of the episodes and took a look at it. The whole red shirt thing is really a myth.
Well, is that because? And here we go. Is that because like no red shirts go down? Now, if like only gold and blue shirts go down, I don't count that.
Well, we'll have to go back and look.
I only count if there's a dude in a gold shirt, a dude in a red shirt. We don't know who the hell either one of them are. Yeah. The dude in the red shirt's dead.
If I remember right, the way they looked at it was they took all of the people we saw in gold shirts, all of the people we saw in red shirts, all the people we saw in blue shirts, and then each color which died, and then did a percentage. Way more of the gold shirts died than and even like percentage wise, way more of the gold shirts died than the red shirt wise. So anyway, we go look that up. That's for another show. But
we're talking about the wedding.
Yeah, we're talking about the wedding. They both should have been wearing red shirts, or at least the one guy should have been wearing red shirts. I think if Gene Roddenberry were sitting here across the table from us and we were to ask him like, hey, what's up with this? I think the two answers he would give us is, hey, remember where we said we're emulating what they would do, from a submarine movie? That's probably how they did it back in the 50s and 60s, was you would have to relay all of that information across the ship and let whomever do it. So that's part of where they were coming from. Two, it also, heightened the drama, as you just said, gave them that real piece. And I think the other thing too is, and this is where we start looking at, okay, the phase.
We should put a button up on that because I don't think we made it clear. They did not get married because it got interrupted because of the Romulans, and then the I guess the husband to be was the only casualty in the as far as Federation's concerned in that
some
space
sort of
battle.
poison gas thing or something got him. Some leak. Yeah. But
some plot hole.
Yeah, it was their purple gas, Made for
Everybody
really
knows purple
dramatic.
gas is dangerous.
Yeah, everybody's gasping. It's what allowed Spock to come in and save the guy who had been, thinking he was the evil guy. Yeah, the bigot. Which gave us our lesson. It brought home the lesson as well that, not only does war have consequences, but also, don't be a bigot. Just stop it.
A lesson which still rings true today.
Exactly. And if I could touch on that one, Ren, just for a moment.
Sure.
Because I've been thinking about this a lot recently with some of the current political stuff that we've had. And I don't mean to compare this to a lot of what we're going on today, but when the Romulans were faceless and they were able to group the entirety of Romulans together as just those people as Romulans, when you can do that, what you're doing in that moment is you're dehumanizing those people.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're taking the individuality out of it. Because as we mentioned earlier, each one of those people has a mom, they have a dad, they have families, they have children, they have spouses, they have loved ones, they have friends back home that they just want to sit out and grill some burgers with, or
drink some Romulan ale.
Yeah, drink some ale. Whatever they do, like they want to go hang out in the pool, they want to play video games, they want to, whatever people in that culture do, they just want to hang out, man. They want to sit around and talk about a TV show on a podcast, broadcasting on YouTube, and people can listen to it later on iTunes or whatever. That's just who those people are. But when you take that away and you just go, if we apply that to our world, it's the Russians. All the Russians over there are horrible, or all the Mexicans, or all the Thai people, or all the Japs, or all the, and maybe even coming back at us from this side, all those stupid Americans. When you take people and you lump them together as this single nationality, faceless group of people, it dehumanizes them and allows you to hate them unnecessarily. But when you take the time to get to know the individual, when you get to know Spock, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Bigotry has to go out the window. Like, it naturally has to go out the window unless you're just an asshole. Yeah. Like if you can't get past that and you can't look and see the individual and understand that it doesn't. I mean, this is what every TV show taught us growing up, Ren, when we were coming up. You mentioned we're basically part of the same generation. I'll go with you on that. This show that we're talking about, by the way, is from a generation before us.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about an old show, and we got these same episodes and these same messages, and dang it, I'm pretty sure that my kids are still getting these same messages today. Maybe eventually we'll get it. I don't know. And these are problems. You were saying earlier how these problems existed in the 60s and the 70s. Well, I think we could even go backwards. These problems existed in the 1860s and the 1760s and the 1360s and the 1060s.
Especially bigotry.
Sure.
That's been as long as man's been around, I'm sure that's been a problem.
And hopefully, and you think about it, for as long as there's been a problem, television, movies, and whatnot have only been a thing for the last 50 years or so. Hopefully, part of this art form can collectively help us as the human race, and that's the beauty of Gene Roddenberry's vision of the future. Because one thing I found real interesting that Kirk said was, he said, "Leave your bigotry in your quarters."
Right,
which gives room for that.
He was talking to the navigator, who was having a problem with the way Spock looked, and maybe Spock could. Yeah, he looks like a Romulan. Maybe Spock could decipher that message because he could be a Romulan. There's a spy on the ship, and finally Kirk just spins around his chair and goes, "Hey, listen, man." He's like, leave your bigotry in your quarters. Like, leave your problems at home. When you come to work, like, we're here to work. Is that clear?
Right, which I found real interesting because in saying leave them in your quarters. Now, again, this is the difference between writing in the 60s versus writing today. Leave them in your quarters gives room for a person to still privately be a bigot.
Well, you have to let people privately be a bigot.
Right, but I think the message that we would rather transmit today is just don't be a bigot in private and public life. Like, just be better than that. Don't like. I found it was. I don't know. It struck out. The idea that. Yes, you can be a bigot privately, but not come out publicly and do it. If you can separate those two, that's better than just being a bigot all the way around.
Yeah, I thought it was sort of like the perfect workplace answer for me.
Sure.
Yes. Because on the bridge is the workplace and Kirk's the boss, and like any of us at our job, and if we had a boss and they'd you do something wrong, like, hey, leave that at home. Like, right. I really don't. How many times you heard that from your boss? I don't care what you do when you're not here. When you're here, this is the way you're going to do it.
Right.
And I thought that was just the way what he was saying, because in a 5-second speech, how are you going to turn somebody not into a bigot?
But Ren, you and I mean, we're dealing with this in a whole other realm. People are not just getting popped for what they do at home or what they do at work. Like, their character gets called into question. What they're doing, dare I say, off the field, right, is now coming back and affecting what they can do as a whole.
I guess a better way to put it would be behind closed doors then. Because in Star Trek at this point, there's no such thing as really social media and TOS.
Right.
So, when I say, at home, I guess what I really mean is behind closed doors. But, in
those
today's
private
society,
really can stay private a lot easier than.
Yeah. But if you start tweeting about or posting on Facebook, then it opens up a whole other can of worms that didn't exist when the show was made, as far as, so I guess like behind closed doors. And I'm a believer in that. Like, if you want to be a bigot, be a bigot. Like, just don't do it around me in public. If I'm over your house and you start talking like a bigot, I got two choices. I either just sit there and take it and listen to it and don't participate in the conversation, or I leave. Like, you can't walk into someone's house and tell them how to act. Like, right. That's just never, ever, ever going to work. And I don't think it should.
Right.
Not that bigotry is ever going to, become acceptable, but there are things that used to be accepted that, now or in the future are not going to be accepted, and vice versa. So, things change, perspectives change. So be able, and tell somebody in their own home how they should act, and you're the guest. Like, I just don't think that's ever a wise way to go about change.
And it's an interesting thing that you bring up, Ren, because we could talk about that. And I don't want to dive too deep into it on this podcast, but how we as a society today, especially, and by this, I don't mean you and me personally. I mean the collective conscious of how it's like we are actually, it seems like we are mandating people's private thoughts and private time. If you think this in private, then that means that you're a bad person all the way around.
Oh, yeah.
And, we're going to slap you for that. We want you to be this perfect person in every phase of your life, which there's a little bit of integrity. I get where that's coming from. So there, I don't like.
If you feel this way about this situation, then you're part of the problem.
Yeah, and
it's like what?
Right. I mean, there's a certain spot of no, I can be a part of the solution and still actually kind of, if you can divorce those two things from themselves, your professional side and your private side, and be able to work, to be like that, then that's fine. But I don't think a lot of people can. I think, to me, what's a much better way of doing it, while I'm not going to go so far as to what to do. I'm sorry. I'm kind of stumbling over my words here. I agree with what you're saying. It's not good policy to tell people how to behave, particularly in their private life, their private home, their private social media page. You can't tell people how to behave privately. To try to encourage them to be better all the way around, though, I think that's perfectly okay. Like, hey, I can encourage you to allow these different things to line up in your life, but I don't want to judge you for it. I'm not going to mandate this. I'm not going to shake my fist in your face and say, you're an evil person because you don't believe this. I'm not going to do that. But, I might encourage somebody to say, hey, we could do this better, and we could be better at home, and
But who says what you are encouraging is the right thing? Because what you think is encouraging, the behavior that you're pushing forward and encouraging, could be the person right next to you, polar opposite. They might have the total opposite view. And this sort of brings us back around to the episode where, it all depends on what side of the line you're standing on, man.
There you go, man.
And depending on how the subject changes, people can jump back. The person, who's on the other side of the line that you're yelling and screaming at, if you change the subject, that person might step over and come on to the side you're on. If it's a different, issue altogether. So, it's a slippery slope, man. But we're figuring it out. I've always said we're in the infancy of social media, and eventually it's going to start. There's going to get a worldwide sort of etiquette that's going to self-police itself. Mm-hmm. I think we're going to be long dead before we kind of see that happen. But there's going to be just rules that, what do you call them? Unwritten rules.
Sure.
About what you say and how you conduct yourself on social media if you want to be taken seriously. Mm-hmm. There's always going to be yahoos out there that are either, depending on the subject, like super for it or super against it. And, unfortunately, sometimes those people are the loudest. But, we're muddling through it, man. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. Which, I mean, allow me to say this, then. I would encourage anybody who is listening to this. I'm not going to tell you what to do on your personal, private social media account. But I would say be smart about what you post and don't just post anything that flits through your mind, because as we can see even today, that kind of stuff is getting back to bosses, and people are losing jobs, and not just the person who tweets it, but everybody who's around that person. We think of one celebrity right now tweeted one stupid thing in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden the entire show that this person was associated with is now off the air.
And all those people lost their jobs.
And all those people lost their job. Not just that person, but all those people. And all those people who were getting residual checks from the stuff that they'd created before, all that got pulled. We also saw that happen with another celebrity, and kind of tarnished his whole deal. And there was a girl who tweeted something, a teenager who tweeted something about a free vacation that somebody paid for, and her father wound up losing his job over it. Like, just be careful what you're putting out there. You can't just post anything that comes through your mind. I'm not going to tell you what to do. You do however you want to do. You do you. But I would just offer that advice.
Yeah, I mean, and I think most people know that. And I think there's some people out there that, you should be able to post whatever you want to.
You can.
But,
you can post whatever you want to. I'm just saying there are going to be consequences for that, because – to go back to what we were saying earlier, people mandate that
mob mentality on social media, man. Mob rules.
Exactly.
Mob rules. Just like mob dancing. All right, so how are we going to segue and wrap this thing up?
I don't know, man. You're the host on this one.
Yeah, you always got to stick me with the hard one. All right, then. Well, is there anything else about the show that you found interesting or you want to talk about? We talked about the marriage. We talked about Spock's dad being a Romulan. We talked about bigotry. We talked about the morality and the horrors of war, even on both sides. I think I missed anything. We talked about yin and yang with Spock and McCoy.
Yeah, I think that's all I had, man.
Well, any final thoughts then before we wrap this up? Say goodnight.
Man, this is a good episode. It's such a good episode. And even with the things that don't make sense, even with the plot holes that we talked about, out of TOS, this especially is just a good episode. And
TOS, you preface that for an original series, which I hate. This one's actually pretty good.
I hate the original series. I don't hate it. I just don't prefer it. But right. This was a good one. I don't know. We've got an essential episode coming up that is not really a great episode, but it's so iconic to the series that we can't not do it. So, I'm enjoying this one for what it is.
What are we talking about? Is that the Gorn?
Yes, the arena. The arena. Is that our next episode, or is it?
You know what? I don't know. Like I said, I'm woefully unprepared as far as those type of things for this. Like, I literally finished dinner, kicked everyone out of this room so I could do the pod, and
nice,
and jumped on with you. But all right,
yeah,
well,
Arena.
I guess
Arena is our next episode. So you guys, if you haven't watched Arena or it's been a while, go watch Arena. We'll be back.
You know it.
Soon.
It's the Gorn. Gave you nightmares.
It's not a good episode, but it is so iconic. We have to watch it.
All right, the way to get a hold of us is on Twitter at STTE. That stands for Star Trek The Essentials. STTE _ podcast. If you have any thoughts or comments on the show, anything we've talked about or we are going to talk about, such as the arena, the email address is sttepod@gmail.com. We are now on a bunch of podcast, apps, places available. Brent, why don't you go ahead and tell the good folks where they could find this pod out there?
Yeah, pretty much. If you are looking for a podcast on an app, type in Star Trek : The Essentials. We should be there. We are on Apple Podcast. I believe we're on Podcast Addict. We're on Stitcher. We're on TuneIn. We're on Google Play Music. We are on Overcast. We are on Jabbercast. We are... we're out there. We've made the rounds. It's, we're there. We're actually on YouTube now. If you want to go check us out on YouTube, we're there as well. We got iHeartRadio is coming. That will be up here very, very shortly. Spotify actually is one that is on deck coming up here real soon as well. You can always listen to us directly at our webpage. That'll link up on our podcast, on our Twitter feed as well. But, yeah, subscribe us, leave us a review. We would love to receive that, and that helps other people find the show as well.
What is our webpage?
We need to get a better one. It's currently StarTrekTheEssentials.libsyn.com.
Oh yeah, forget that. Find it on one of your podcast apps.
Yeah, there you go.
Don't find
it on one of the podcast apps.
Find it through there. Too hard. All right, man. Where can the good people find you?
If you guys want to get,
if
you guys want to get in touch with me personally, I am at Brent Allen Live across all the social medias, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and I will respond to anything you shoot out to me.
And the way to get to me, besides the Star Trek The Essentials Twitter handle, which of course again is STTE _ podcast, you can also find me on Twitter at Rendax, REN_DAXT. Well, that's going to do it for us, folks. Next week is the arena, the Gorn. Like Brent says, it's not really a really good episode, but man, is there no villain that's scarier from the original series in the Gorn? What an iconic look, even down to his bejeweled onesie
and the zipper. Can't forget the zipper.
Can't forget the zipper and his bug eyes. Those fly eyes look like diamonds. And as we end every podcast, ex asterisk scientia, from the stars, knowledge. See you next time.